Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world. My name is Jessica, and this Kiwi is today going to read some books that she's been meaning to finish for a long time. So today's going to be just a really cozy reading vlog. We're going to go through 3 books that I've half read that need to be finished. One of them is a library book, so that has to be finished quite quickly. It's due on the 12th of December. The other 2 are ebooks. One of them is an ARC, and thank you so much to Addie Flynn, who is the author of this book, for sending it to me. And yet today I just want to see if I can finish these books nice and quick and get them read and get them either onto or off my shelf. So let's go through them. So the first book I want to mention is Girl Unplugged by Addie Flynn, and it is a dual perspective and timeline following a punk rocker who has been kidnapped and also the detective agency that is investigating her case, and it goes back and forth between the two in the span of 11 months. So Charlie, Rebecca, Ashley and Clive make up Charlie Chin and Co. Detective Agency, and these guys are the ones investigating the case of Ametha, who is a punk rocker who has just disappeared off the face of the planet, and then all of a sudden she starts releasing new music. I thought it was fun to read about a group of detectives that were in their 20s, and then Clive, who is certainly not in his 20s anymore, and them going about solving these cases. And what I really liked about this was the lead up to finding Ametha, and the one clue that really helped lead these guys to her and where she was. It was sprinkled a few times throughout the book, but it wasn't obvious until it came together, and that I really liked. So usually I don't like the dual perspective or dual timeline arrangement, but in this case I thought it was actually done really well, going between Ametha and the detective agency and bringing it together slowly and slowly and slowly. And I thought it was one of the only books that I've read that I actually enjoyed reading that perspective. The other thing I really liked was the dynamic between the detective agency team, and just the fun banter and the back and forward and the comedy that comes about trying to teach Clive how to use computers, for example, I thought was really funny. I thought Ash was the best person ever. So I would love to see a book from Ash's perspective, because he was just the best thing in the whole world, Team Ash, the whole way. The one critique that I did have about this book is that it did have 2 cases for this detective agency, so they're struggling, but then all of a sudden they get 2 really big cases. And one of them is Ametha, and then one of them is an infidelity case that seems quite inconsequential at first, and then it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it turns out that it's actually quite massive, and I think it needed to be in its own book. It didn't make sense to the story, especially what's being described on the blurb, where it centers around Ametha so much. That being said, I think that particular case would have made an interesting book on its own. But in this case, I think it didn't need to be alongside this one. The extra space could have been used to flesh out the characters a little bit more, maybe speaking to Charlie's side investigation, which she has going on that isn't actually mentioned a lot, but again could make a really interesting story if it was fleshed out a bit more and given a bit more attention. Overall, this was a really fun read. It came to me at the perfect time. I was starting to get into a bit of a reading slump, and this pulled me right out of it. It's a palate cleanser in a good way. I don't mean it in any bad or inflammatory way. It was easy to read, and it, like I said, it pulled me out of a reading slump. And for that reason, I really enjoyed it, and for that reason, I will reread it, probably multiple times. So I gave the characters in this book a 3. Again, I think they could have been fleshed out a little bit more had the second case not been in the book, because it wasn't even to do with the Amifa case, it was something completely different. So I think that time could have been spent to flesh out the characters a bit more. I would love to have understood a little bit more about the conflict between Rebecca and her father. Also understood a little bit more about Charlie's background and why she has this side investigation, and maybe how she got into detectiving, if that's a word. So yeah, there's plenty that could have been done with character development there. The plot altogether was a 3, but as the separate cases, I thought it was a 4. I loved the Amifa plotline and getting to find her and hearing from Amifa's side of the story and seeing the stark contrast between who Amifa became in those 11 months to when she first started and when she was kidnapped. That was quite interesting to see. I gave the world a 3. It was kind of neither here nor there for me. I don't really understand a whole lot about English, geography, Leeds, that kind of thing. The places were kind of just places. I liked the little town where Amifa was kept. That was quite lovely, the little interactions that the team had there. But apart from that, the places were just places. There wasn't enough exploration of the house that Amifa was in, like considering she had almost free reign of that house. And I think there could have been more to do there. But rereadability, I gave it 4 because it is a great kind of in between book. Easy to read, definitely rereadable. So yeah, those were my ratings, and that came out to an average of 3.5. So the second book that we read was The London Silent Society by Sarah Penner, and this book I had to get read pretty fast. This was due back at the library on the 12th of December, and this again follows multiple POVs, namely Lena, who is an understudy to a medium in Paris, and she is wanting to solve her sister's murder, and in doing so they need to contact her spirit through a seance, but Lena is a bit of a skeptic when it comes to that area of expertise. She's more of a scientist. And then it follows Mr. Morley, who is the vice president of the London Silent Society. And this kind of tells his story from, just after finding the president again being murdered, to enlisting the help of this medium that Lena is the understudy of, and also using his perspective to actually tell Evie's story, who is Lena's sister. That perspective I didn't like it as much. I felt like it was more just to tell Evie's story than it was about telling Mr. Morley's story. So both Evie and the president, Mr. Volkman, they were both murdered on the same night. And so you've got Lena who wants to solve Evie's murder, and you've got Mr. Morley who wants to solve Mr. Volkman's murder, and both using the same medium. I thought it was okay. The characters were well fleshed out. Like I said, the perspective of Mr. Morley was mainly used for flashbacks of Evie leading up to how she got murdered. There's a bit of a conflict between Mr. Morley and Lena. He didn't realise that she would be travelling with Borderline to perform the seance, and immediately Lena gets a bad impression from Mr. Morley, and so there's a bit of conflict there. There's also a bit of contention with being kind of hurried and rushed around the back and essentially sleeping in a broom closet while they're in London preparing for the seance and then going through the seance. There is a small amount of sexual content in this book, and I feel like it's written quite well. It's not overly done, it's not just a blackout screen, it's somewhere nice in the middle. There is mention of a sapphic relationship and also a straight relationship, but they're very briefly touched on. It's not a main point of the story, it's just there. There were a couple of times where the romance was a little bit more unexpected and explicit than I anticipated. When it did happen, it was more than just a polite, a kiss or a caress or something like that. It went quite deep, and when it first happened, it came out of nowhere and it caught me off guard at 7:30 in the morning when I was trying to eat breakfast and have a cup of coffee, and I was like, that's a bit much for that early in the morning. I didn't really like the ending twist. I really didn't like the ending twist as to who murdered both of these people that we're trying to investigate. I thought the writing there was quite lazy. It certainly could have been done a different way. I think that part of the story was a bit rushed and maybe given a second thought. So for the characters, I gave a 4. For the plot, I gave a 3.5. I mean, there was a plot there. I just think that plot twist was really bad, and I thought it was not thought about really well. There is so much else that could have happened, and that just devastated me. The world, I gave a 4. I could really see myself in London in the 1800s, and the politics, I guess, around having these societies where women are not allowed to be a part of at all, and also these horse and carriages, and even down to the library and the study within the Science Society. I could just really see myself being there. So that was really well done. The rereadability rating was a 1 for me. That gave an average rating of 3.1, so it's rounded down to a 3-star. And that's kind of all I can say about that, really. So book 3, we have The Saviour's Sister by Jenna Moreci, and this is the second book I guess you could say, as a companion to the Saviour's Champion. It's in the Saviour's series. This follows the Saviour's tournament, but not from Tobias's point of view, like we saw in the Saviour's Champion, but from Layla's point of view, who's the healer. We see all of these conflicts that are within the castle, and we get an inside perspective as to the truth of this tournament and the truth of this world, and it's a peek behind the curtain, if you will. So the Sovereign's Tournament, which is explored more in the Saviour's Champion, is held essentially when the Saviour comes of age and is able to marry. There are 20 men who fight to the death in order to win the favour of both the Saviour and the Sovereign. And at the very end of that, one man gets to marry the Saviour and become king and rule alongside her. What's explored in the Saviour's sister is the internal plot to murder the Saviour, so the Sovereign can continue ruling the realm. I did find the Saviour's sister a bit harder to read, and I'll have a better review of this coming up shortly. I found some of the language quite crass. I found some of the sexual nature very crass. So in that respect, I was quite disappointed. The romance between Tobias and Layla, when it was good, it was good. So there were a few sticking points, and I'll go into them in a little bit more detail in my full review. But at the end of the day, I did still enjoy my time reading the book. There is another installment coming at some point, hopefully soon. And although the Saviour's Sister was certainly not my favourite compared to the Saviour's Champion, I'm really hoping that the next one will kind of help to explore the world building a bit more and explore the romance a bit more, and just kind of help us see outside the castle gates, because in both books the world building was very claustrophobic. You've got Tobias in the arena and the labyrinth, and then you've got Layla in the castle, and then they come together, and that's it. That's really the only two places that are explored. So I'm really hoping this next installment will help fix that, and you'll get to see kind of more of the realm, maybe more of some of these other realms. So I gave the characters for the Saviour's Sister a 3, and that's because there were quite a few throwaway characters, I feel like. I mean, there were all of these servants that were mentioned and used a few times, but they were all forgettable. And I think if you're going to have a character in a book, they need to serve a purpose, not just to bathe and clothe you, but to serve some kind of other plot point. Speaking of plot points, I gave it a 2. The political system, I didn't really enjoy that much. Also, knowing what was going to happen, there was no stakes for me, like 0 high stakes, even though there was this big murder plot and they were trying to figure out, you know, who the traitors were and things like that. And I'll speak a bit more about that later. There was no stakes. There was nothing to get my heart racing. There was no question of, are they going to get out of this? Because reading the Saviour's Champion and knowing what happens in the end, and knowing that this is the same story just from a different perspective, it didn't really work in that respect for me. the romance, and I will specify the romance, I gave it a 4. When it was Layla and Tobias and they were being really sweet and they were connecting with each other, there is one particular scene relatively early on in both books where they first really connect with each other, and that one scene stayed with me from The Saviour's Champion, and I've never really forgotten that, and that's the kind of connection that was done really well. The rereadability of The Saviour's Sister, I gave a 1. I don't think it's something that I need to pick up again. I think The Saviour's Champion was written so much better, and it's something that I could pick up again, and I probably will pick up again because I really enjoyed that perspective and knowing what the challenges were and the action with Tobias. But there was nothing in this book from Layla's perspective that I really cared about. And for that reason, I don't need to pick it up again. And that gave an average of 2.5 for this book. And that is a harsh rating for me. I will continue on the series, but I have a lot higher expectations from the next book, and I'm really hoping that there's some improvements. And so with that, guys, the 3 books that we read were Girl Unplugged by Addie Flynn, released in January 2024, The London Seance Society by Sarah Penner, and The Saviour's Sister by Jenna Moresi. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a bit of a different pace, a bit of a different thing. I knew I had these on my shelf and most of them were mostly read anyway and they just needed to be done. And so I thought I'd take you along the journey with me. So your question of the day is, have you read any of these books? You wouldn't have read Girl Unplugged by Addie Flynn yet, although I would recommend picking it up. Just saying. But have you read either The Saviour's Sister or The London Seance Society? Let me know down in the comments below if you have read these books and what you thought of them. And I will see you next time. Have a great day. Bye.